Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another Deltarune theory reaction, but this one is by someone I haven't reacted to before called the Soph. And this is, Papyrus is probably the Knight. If you don't know what the Knight is, in Deltarune, so far, all of the Dark Worlds we've had to go into, the other worlds that we've had to destroy, essentially, were created by a character simply known as the Knight. Now, for a while there, people were speculating that it was possibly Chris who was the Knight, because at the end of Chapter 2, you see them create a Dark World. Though in recent times, I've been seeing people kind of like move away from that idea and say that, oh, well, I mean, he could have literally just seen the Knight do it, because you do see, like, recordings of the Dark Fountain's creation in Cyberworld, and that's how Chris possibly, they just copied what they saw and ta-da, what do you know? But this one isn't one I've heard before. Well, maybe I have heard, because the Papyrus being the Knight, I think I heard once said as a joke somewhere, probably on like the Deltarune or Undertale subreddit at some point. I don't know, probably a while ago. I mean, considering that they're a character we haven't met yet, we have no idea what their personality is like in the Deltarune world, as opposed to what we know of they're like in Undertale. I mean, with literally 5 more chapters to go before the game is done, literally anything is possible at this moment in time, so you never know. So yeah, we're just gonna get into this. Of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Welcome. The Knight, the Roaring Knight, they're one of the most mysterious characters in this game. Everyone in town could be a suspect. Is it Chris? Is it Gaster? Is it Papyrus? Despite being one of Toby's favorite characters, he's conveniently missing from the story. Sans implies we're gonna meet him around the time Asriel comes home, which would be near the end of the story. And conveniently enough, the end of a story is the perfect time to have a big plot twist.
I completely forgot Sans said that. Because, I mean, of course, like, everybody was joking around how in the game you hear, when you go to Sans and Papyrus' house, you knock on the door and all you hear is, like, the trestling of bones fading away, and everybody made jokes about that. But I had completely forgotten that Sans said that we were going to meet Papyrus around the same time that Asriel came home. Which, I have to wonder why. Because, like, in the world, I mean, like, I would think that Papyrus is there. I mean, the trestling of bones going away, they're in the house, they just didn't come to the door. So what's stopping them from coming out before then? Unless Sans knows that something is wrong with Papyrus and they're causing a bit of trouble. Yeah.
To have the main villain's identity revealed. So, in this video, I will present all the evidence that points to Papyrus being the Knight. Then, I will explain the implications this fact will have on the story. I want to shout out Insanely ADD and Sock Muppet for their videos on the subject, because I will be stealing all of their arguments. Now, let's get right into the theory. In order for someone to be the Knight, they must have the means, motive, and opportunity to do so. Means is if the person was physically capable of committing the crime. Motive is the person's reason for committing the crime. And opportunity is if the person had an opportunity to commit the crime. Let's start out with means. Does Papyrus have the means to be the Knight?
Well, I mean, from what we've seen, potentially anybody is able to make a Dark Fountain, especially if, like, one, we've seen Chris do it, and Queen was originally going to have Birdley and Noelle try to make one. So I'd assume that's just a thing that any Lightner can do. They just need to know how to do it in the first place.
Well, according to Queen, any Lightner with enough determination can create a Dark World. Papyrus is a Lightner, so check. Well. And in Undertale, Papyrus is determined to do anything he puts his mind to. So assuming he has a reason to be the Knight, I definitely think he could be determined enough to get the job done. So means has been satisfied. Next we have motive. I'm actually gonna hold off on talking about motive because it's gonna take a significantly longer amount of time to explain it, so I'm just gonna move on to opportunity.
Well, again, motive is the foggiest of all of these, because we literally haven't met him yet in the game. I mean, remember, if you treat Sans like he's like an old friend and he knows you, he gets all weirded out about you acting all buddy-buddy with him, even though you've literally only met him, like, just now.
Like,
Papyrus hasn't even appeared on screen yet.
These dark worlds. Let's start with Castletown. This dark world was created before the events of Chapter 1, and since we don't know what Papyrus was doing during that time, he definitely could have created it. As for why he chose the supplies closet at school, I have a few ideas. He could have learned about it from Sans, who had spoken to Alphys beforehand. He may have also chosen it because it's secluded, but another possibility is that someone told him specifically to open a dark world in that room. More on that later. So overall, I think he could have easily opened the Castletown dark world. So let's move on to Card Kingdom. Since the Card Kingdom is so similar to Castletown, they were both opened in similar locations and were opened before Chapter 1, I'm applying the same logic to Castletown. Transitive property go burr, which means Papyrus did have an opportunity to create it. Lastly, we have the Cyber City Dark World. This is going to be more complicated to prove because the time period in which this fountain was created is heavily debated in the fandom. Some people think it was made the night before Chapter 2, others think it was made right after Berdly and Noelle fell asleep in the library. I'm not going to argue which one is correct, I'm just going to consider both possibilities.
Actually thinking about it, well, I mean, as we saw with, well, I mean, Chris and Susie walked into a dark world even though it had already been opened, but you could literally just say that's because, you know, Susie was forcing Chris to walk in and she's not the brightest bulb. Yeah, I guess a normal person would be a bit more apprehensive about walking into a door that had darkness spilling out of it. Yeah, okay, I can see that. Again, also because it did say that there was that there was enough room in the closet in the computer lab for somebody to have been standing there potentially. So they could have been. So if this is Papyrus, he could have been waiting in the closet and then opened it after, or literally opened it with them in the room and then run out as it was forming?
Before, then Papyrus absolutely had the opportunity to make it. All he had to do was sneak outside his house, open it, and then sneak back home. If it was opened while Noelle and Berdly were sleeping, he also had the opportunity to open it. After all, the library was open to the public that afternoon, and all he had to do was go inside and quickly leave. Though this explanation does beg the question, how did he sneak into the library and not get noticed by Undyne? Well, it's simple. Papyrus is described as forgettable, so he could have easily blended in with the crowd. Especially since Undyne seems a bit, preoccupied. If that's not a good enough explanation for you, recall the flavor text that implies someone hid in the closet, so it's possible that Papyrus snuck into the closet before Undyne showed up at the intersection, and then just, like, opened the Dark World when he felt the time was right. As for why Papyrus decided to wait to open the Dark World, I'll explain why later. Okay, so I just established that Papyrus does have the opportunity to be the knight, so now let's move on to motive. At first glance, it seems kind of hard to believe that Papyrus is the knight. In Undertale, Papyrus is a nice guy with a heart of gold, and since Deltarune characters are very similar to their Undertale counterparts, it follows that this version of Papyrus is also a nice guy. So the idea of Papyrus endangering not only the lives of children, but the entire world seems a bit out of character, if you ask me.
I mean, again, we could be doing the whole thing where he's operating, you know, without full information here. I mean, literally, Queen was doing just that. She wanted to, you know, create more dark worlds, even though she didn't know about the roaring potentially happening. So, I mean, there could be, you know, just the fact that Papyrus could have been told, you know, only some information about the creation of dark worlds and their capabilities, but not what happens when you have too many of them open simultaneously.
Unless he doesn't understand what he's doing. What if someone is tricking him into doing this? He always was kind of gullible in Undertale, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think that Papyrus is in a very emotionally vulnerable state in his life that makes him very easy to manipulate. Let me explain. In Undertale, Papyrus seems to be bombastic, extroverted, and outlandish, but beneath the surface lies a lot of vulnerabilities. He's lonely. His mailbox is always empty. He somehow has a negative amount of followers on the undernet, and apart from Sans and Undyne, he doesn't seem to have that many close friends, which is why when Frisk befriends him, he's so happy. He desperately wants friends and admiration. But what separates this version of Papyrus from Deltarune's Papyrus is the fact that he has a purpose, he has a goal. He wants to capture a human so that way he can join the Royal Guard and finally become popular. That's why he doesn't hide away in his room like Deltarune Papyrus does. Unfortunately, Deltarune's Papyrus doesn't have a goal or a purpose, so he doesn't really have a reason to, you know, get out of bed and do things. That's why he's so isolated and depressed. Now,
oh god, depressed Papyrus. Now I'm just thinking that when we finally meet Deltarune Papyrus, he's gonna be like, sort of like a knockoff version of Underswap Papyrus, where he's basically just a depressed version of himself that's almost indistinguishable from Sans. Oh, that's gonna be so sad.
Now imagine that you're in his shoes. You're this sad, depressed, hopeless person, and then someone comes into your life. They earn your trust and they tell you, I have an important mission for you. You're gonna be powerful and important. You're finally gonna get some respect from others, but you need to listen to me. They tell you that you are the Roaring Knight and that you're gonna save the world. They tell you how, when, and where to open dark worlds. And you listen to every single order they give you because you finally have a purpose. You're the Roaring Knight. So to address the name Roaring Knight, most people believe that the Roaring Knight wants to cause the roaring. After all, they themselves call themselves the Roaring Knight, which means that if Papyrus was a knight, doesn't that mean he knows what the roaring is, right? Not necessarily. Perhaps the Roaring Knight is just a title that was given to him by another person. If that is the case, he probably assumed it was some sort of cool nickname and didn't really think too deeply into it. I mean, come on, even Queen calls this person the Roaring Knight, despite not knowing what the roaring is either. So is it that unbelievable that Papyrus just calls himself the Roaring Knight but doesn't think too deeply about the title? I think not. Need more evidence? Well, how about the fact that Papyrus has a history of being manipulated by another person to do their bidding, specifically Flowey. Let me explain. So in Undertale, Papyrus...
Oh god. Can you imagine if it turned out that, like, Papyrus was being, like, tricked by Asriel, and Asriel's actually the big bad behind the story and not Yaster? Like, can you imagine that after all these years of build-up, after everybody imagining that Gaster has something to do with, like, the plot of Deltarune, it's like he has literally nothing to do with it, and it's actually been, like, Asriel the entire time, and it has something to do with, like, a college project or something? Like, oh my god, I would imagine that the communities would literally riot. I cannot see anything else happening if that became true.
Papyrus and Flowey were friends. Sans talks about Flowey giving Papyrus advice, flattery, and predictions. During Flowey's monologue on the genocide route, he also talks about them being friends, and so does the scrapped Undertale alarm clock app. But Flowey didn't befriend Papyrus out of the goodness of his heart. It seems like he had a...
Actually, that's the thing, actually, just thinking about it. I've heard so much talk about the scrapped, like, alarm clock app. What was the reason for it getting scrapped? Like, I've heard so much about it, and yet I haven't heard any reason as to why it was eventually scrapped in the first place. Like, I don't know.
A plan for him from the beginning. A plan that he executed near the end of the pacifist route. So after you beat Flowey in the neutral route, he comes back to us and he says that if we want to get our happy ending, we need to befriend everyone. This again isn't something he's saying out of the goodness of his heart. He's up to something. He wants us to befriend everyone so he can get everyone in the same room and steal their souls. It starts with Papyrus insisting that we befriend Undyne. We show up at her house, seemingly unannounced, and then Papyrus jumps out the window to leave us alone with Undyne.
Oh God,
After we befriend Undyne, Papyrus convinces her to ask us to deliver a love letter to Alphys. This letter, upon delivery, coaxes Alphys out of the lab and distracts her, so Flowey can sneak in and do his thing. We know that he snuck in because he tampered with the elevator and put a letter on Alphys' desk saying, I know what you did. Meanwhile, as Alphys is on a date with us, we are conveniently interrupted by Papyrus and Undyne.
Once again.
Alphys confesses her feelings, blah blah blah. She goes to train with Papyrus for a little bit, but is abruptly sent home immediately after. Then we get a phone call from Papyrus, who tells us in a very awkward manner to go see Alphys. When we get there, we see that Alphys has unlocked the door to the true lab. We go inside and get trapped due to a power outage. What's interesting about this power outage is that it only affects the elevators. All the other electronics appear to be working just fine. As we make our way through the true lab, and as we're about to leave, we get a call from someone with Asriel's voice, who thanks us. We get into the elevator, and it takes us straight to the throne room. Flowey's roots block our exit, which forces us to go to Asgore. As we're talking to Asgore, Flowey seals the human souls. Toriel saves us from Asgore, and then it's revealed that all of our friends we've made along the way are here, kumbaya. Then it's revealed that everyone was invited here by Papyrus, and that Papyrus was told to invite everyone by Flowey. And then from there, we all know what happens. He steals everyone's souls, and there's a huge boss fight, and oh my god, through the power of friendship, we defeat evil and free everyone from the barrier, you know? But like, isn't...
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, after actually thinking about it, like, you beat the final boss of Undertale with the power of friendship. I never thought of it like that before. Oh my god, that's wonderful.
Isn't that crazy that he's able to manipulate Papyrus to such an extent? I mean, clearly Papyrus wasn't like doing this on purpose or because he's like a bad person or a malicious person, but that just goes to show how easy he is to manipulate. So is it possible that he's also being manipulated by someone else into being the knight? I think so. But okay, if Papyrus is being manipulated, who is doing the manipulation? Well, I personally think it's the narrator of the character creation sequence, who I will be referring to as just the narrator from now on. I believe this for many reasons. One of them being how similar he is to Flowey, someone else who manipulated Papyrus. They both take over someone's Twitter to advertise their games. They both are the first person you encounter in their games. They both pretend to be your friend before backstabbing you. They're both interrupted by someone else whilst backstabbing you. They both have a bleak outlook on life that the audience is supposed to disagree with. Both characters treat people as pawns to get their way, and after first encountering them, they both disappear into the shadows, but are always watching. Considering all the similarities, is it possible that they share another similarity? Is it possible that they both manipulated Papyrus into participating into their master plan? I think so. Another interesting similarity this theory creates is the fact that both games would have two villains who use others to get their way. In Undertale, the two villains are Flowey and Chara, who manipulate Papyrus and Fresk respectively, and in Deltarune, the two villains would be Papyrus and the narrator. The narrator manipulates Papyrus, and Papyrus inadvertently manipulates King and Queen. Another thing I want to mention, but couldn't find the right place to put it, is the narrator's reaction if we name ourselves Papyrus. Interesting. This begs the question, if the narrator is manipulating Papyrus into being the knight, why? He clearly wants to cause the Roaring, since he'd be the only one to give Papyrus the Roaring Knight title, but why does he want to end the world? Well, to understand this question, we need to analyze the psyche of the narrator. We must determine who this person is. Now, considering how mysterious—
Well, that's just the thing, like, I could see any number of reasons why. My personal theory is, yes, it's Gaster, but it's because, like, he's in the Deltarune world, but he's not part of it. Like, the whole thing of, like, the Deltarune world is essentially almost like a simulation, let's say. And he's doing experiments, and those experiments would potentially be, how far can this world go before it breaks? And I would guess that the thing that's, pushing the limits and breaking it are the Dark Worlds. And say, like, how many Dark Worlds can you have open at the same time? Or if it's just, like, not even how many you have open at the same time, it's like, how many do you have you opened at all? Like, maybe, like, opening a Dark World is like a permanent scar on the world that permanently weakens it, even if you close the fountain. Like, who knows?
This person is, it's going to be kind of tricky to— it's Gaster. I know, a very stunning and brave take on my part. I imagine most of you already believe the narrator is Gaster, but I'll quickly go over the evidence. 1. Gaster's theme is called Hymn in the Files, and the song that plays during the character creation sequence is called Another Hymn in the Files. This implies that the narrator is another version of Gaster, or a shattered piece of Gaster. 2. Another hymn contains Gaster's leitmotif. 3. The narrator speaks—
Again, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Before I started watching, like, Deltarune theories, I had never heard the words leitmotif said so many times.
Like Gaster and uses a lot of the same phrases as him. 4. The narrator seems to have an interest in science, and Gaster is a scientist. More on that later.
Yes.
5. The vessel looks like a Gaster follower / goner. And 6. The sequence is called the Goner Maker in the Files, which further connects the narrator with the Goners and therefore Gaster. As you can see, there's strong evidence that the narrator is Gaster. Another thing I want to point out is Gaster's connection to the prophecy. If you use the Wayback Machine on Deltarune's website, you'll see that there's a pitch black image called Hymn. If you turn up the exposure and dehaze the image, you get this sentence in Wingdings. It says, quote, 3 heroes appear to banish the angels' heaven, end quote. All of this proves is that Gaster has been talking about the prophecy on Deltarune's official website all the way back in 2016, which is pretty crazy. It's clearly foreshadowing something.
Well, I mean, as I've been told in other, in people's comments, apparently Deltarune was the original idea that Toby wanted to do, but he couldn't figure out how to make it into a game, so he then, changed it and altered, and eventually we got Undertale.
Specifically, I think Gaster knows about the prophecy and is using it to cause the Roaring.
Or he could have made the prophecy. We could be operating here on either fake prophecy rules or self-fulfilling prophecy rules. You never know.
Let me explain. The prophecy, as Rouse describes it, goes like this, quote, "For millennia, light and dark has lived in balance. But if this harmony were to shatter, a terrible calamity would occur. The sky would run black with terror, and the land will crack with fear. Then, her heart pounding, the earth will draw its final breath. Only then, shining with hope, three heroes appear at world's edge. Only they can seal the fountains and banish the angels' heaven. Only then will balance be restored, and the world saved from destruction." Focus on the wording. The terrible calamity that's being described is clearly the roaring. Another weird thing about this prophecy is that it's very conditional. If this harmony were to shatter, not when this harmony were to shatter, which means it's not guaranteeing that the roaring will happen. The only thing it guarantees for sure is that if someone causes the roaring, then three heroes appear at world's edge to banish the angels' heaven. And only they can banish the angels' heaven. So if I, say, for whatever reason wanted to cause the roaring and I knew about the prophecy, I would know that if I caused the roaring, I wasn't out of the woods yet because three heroes would appear and try to throw a wrench in my plan. So if I really wanted to cause the roaring and end the world, I would need to some way sabotage the heroes' plan. Like, I don't know, maybe enslaving one of the three heroes and forcing them to do my bidding? But okay, this still doesn't answer the question. Why does Gaster want to cause the roaring? Well, I don't think it's for a very complex reason.
Again, as I said, he's a scientist and he wants to see what happens. Being smart does not automatically mean you have morals. So I mean, hey, if I have to destroy a world to see what happens afterwards, I'll do it.
1. Gaster is dead and appears to exist as some sort of incorporeal being, so I doubt he cares if the world was gonna end since it doesn't affect him. Also, Gaster is a scientist. Even the narrator shows that childlike curiosity scientists have. What an interesting behavior. So I think he wants to cause the roaring because he's curious and wants to know what will happen. I think during his research, he stumbled upon the Deltarune prophecy, so he knows that if he wants to cause the roaring, he needs to deal with the prophecy and the three heroes. I also think he wants to know if the prophecy is real or if it's just bullshit, right? So that might be another reason why he's trying to cause the roaring. He's trying to see, hey, are the heroes gonna show up and prove this prophecy true? So yeah, that's why I think Gaster wants to cause the roaring. So let's recap everything we've discussed at this point. The narrator, who is Gaster, wants to cause the roaring out of pure scientific curiosity. Through his scientific studies, he discovered the Deltarune prophecy. He realized that if he wanted to cause the roaring, he would need to defeat the three heroes who were prophesied to appear after the roaring. Through some unknown means, he gained control over Chris's body so that when the roaring did happen, he could use them to sabotage the three heroes' plans. At the same time, he started gaining Papyrus's trust and using his loneliness and need for admiration to manipulate him into becoming the Roaring Knight. He, of course, didn't tell Papyrus the ultimate consequences of his action. He instructed Papyrus to open dark worlds across town, hoping that it will eventually cause the roaring. And that's where the story is right now. As for when I think Papyrus will be revealed as the knight, I think it will be around the same time we meet Azrael, like I said in the intro. After all, Sans does say, quote, "I'm sure you'll meet him someday, maybe around the time when your brother comes home," end quote. Okay, so now that
I swear, that tease right there, that hurts.
I've recapped everything, there's one last thing I want to bring up before ending this video, and it's why Gaster chose Papyrus over anyone else. But before we do that, if you're enjoying this video so far, and don't skip, no. If you're enjoying this video so far, consider checking out the rest of my channel. All I make is Deltarune and Undertale theory content. If you end up enjoying it, make sure to subscribe. And if you really like me, join my membership program. Alright, that's it. E-begging session over. Why did Gaster choose Papyrus? Well, in my personal opinion, I think it's because Gaster is a family member of Papyrus. If you're familiar with my channel, you'd know that I made the same argument in my first ever YouTube video. There was a third skeleton brother? Don't watch it, it's fucking terrible, but I'll just summarize it right here. Basically, I saw this post on Twitter that Toby made talking about like old notes he had written which contained the original ideas for Undertale and its various characters, and one of the papers was the original concept for Papyrus. Now there are these big censor boxes just like obscuring some sort of sentence, but if you zoom in really close you can see these tiny little slivers of letters. So by analyzing Toby Fox's handwritings and zooming into these little tiny slivers, I was able to determine that Gaster is actually one of Papyrus's brothers. Look, I understand how crazy that sounds, but I promise you, my methodology was rock solid. Now, if you look—
Well, I mean, the whole thing with that is, I mean, this was, as Toby said himself, these were very early development drawings. So it could have been, at one point, Gaster might have been, you know, a brother of Sans and Papyrus, but as the game and story developed, then, you know, that changed. He's no longer related, or no longer a brother at the very least. I remember, you know, old theory, like long ago. I forgot whether it was an actual theory or just like in a fan comic I read once, where like Gaster was like their father or creator, depending on whether, like, you know, scientists artificially created them or something like that.
Look at the sentence. It's clearly talking about family members Papyrus has, you know, a Sans named brother and a blank named blanked. So what I did in my original video is
and the sister named Gaster. Wait a minute.
I listed out every family title known to man and systematically eliminated each word until I got the words another brother. I'm not gonna do that again. I'm just gonna show you how another brother matches up with these little slivers. Look at this A. Now look closer. You can see that along with this big box, there's also a smaller box obscuring the A's tail. Why is this important? Well, look at some of Toby's A's. When they're part of a bigger word, their tails are always connected to the next letter. So this smaller box was put there to obscure if it's a single A or part of a larger word, like an or another. Why does it matter if this word is a, and, or another? Well, if it's A, that means the next word starts with a consonant, which eliminates a lot of possible family titles. If it's an, then it works in the same way but with vowels, which again limits our options for family titles. And if the word is another, then the only family title that makes sense is brother. Has a brother named Sans and another brother named blah blah blah. So in my original video, I was able to narrow down the options to these possibilities. A great uncle named blank, or another brother named blank. If you look at this little sliver right here, you can see that it curls in the shape of an upside down V. After analyzing Toby's lowercase b's and uppercase u's, they both at times make that upside down V shape, but it's more common for his b's than his u's. Now look at this sliver. As you can see, it juts out. Toby's cursive R's and E's also jut out in this same way, but his E's don't jut up as high as this sliver does, but R's do, which means that the word ends with an R. Brother would be the only option in that case, which means that the first two censored words are another brother. Looking over here, you can see these two little slivers. This sliver juts out in the same way as his cursive R's, and this little sliver juts out like a lot of letters, one of them being T. And oh, would you look at that? WD Gaster fits perfectly, which means that the whole sentence should read, has a brother named Sans and another brother named W.D. Gaster.
I mean, I gotta give you a lot of credit there, like, Soph. That is some phenomenal detective work right there. Like, that is really good.
You're probably saying, couldn't a million words also fit with those two slivers? No.
Yeah, probably.
Why? Because I said so. Okay, so let's say that there are no flaws in my methodology, and let's just say that Gaster is Papyrus's brother. Why is this relevant to this theory? Well, remember what I said at the beginning of the video. Imagine you're a lonely soul with no real purpose when someone you trust comes into your life and tells you they have an important mission for you. A mission that will make you powerful and important. A mission that will gain the admiration and friendship of other people. Wouldn't you listen to anything that person says, especially if that person is your own brother? Papyrus, who's already a very gullible, naive person, would stand no chance against someone who's family. He's very loyal to the people he loves and would definitely believe anything this hypothetical family member would say. And that, my friend, is why I think Papyrus is the—
Yeah, you know, it just puts another possibility on the board for when the next games come out, or the next chapters more accurately. But you know, again, so as I said before, if it turns out that Gaster was like not— It is not anywhere in the story, and it turned out to be Azrael. Again, I'm calling it here. The whole community will riot, like, and they will find Toby, and he will be in a lot of danger. But yeah, I mean, the thought of Papyrus being the knight, the reason why, like, I can just imagine, like, maybe chapter 5 or chapter 6, maybe, like, it's like we're on the knight's tail. We get there just as they create, like, the dark world, and we're chasing them throughout the whatever dark world is in there, and we keep getting glimpses of them, and they look like they're big bulky armor, and then we catch them right in front of the dark fountain, like, to stop them, and he lifts up the visors, like, nah, yes, it is I, the roaring knight. I'm sorry, that was a horrible, but yeah, that I can see it now. That would be just perfect. And then you have to convince him that, you know, what he's doing is wrong, and then possibly if that doesn't happen in the very last chapter, in the 7th chapter, is when, you know, you actually go up against, you know, Gaster or, you know, Azrael. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Oh, but yeah, again, I cannot wait for the next chapters of, like, Deltarune to come out. I know originally Toby was going to release, like, chapter 3, 4, and 5 all at once, but then he changed it to just 3 and 4. So, do we have any idea when that's going to be released? Because I know the anticipation right now is still killing me. Okay, well, at the very least, one person suspects that it'll be released in the fall of this year. So, yeah, we're going to have to see. So yeah, that'll be it for now. So of course, as always, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day, and with all that out of the way, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.